I tell you what, it's not like the olden days. I'm Jake,
I'm Rosie.
and this is our podcast on South Park, which was first broadcast in the US on Comedy Central in August 1997. It made it onto Channel 4 in the UK fairly early in 1998. And since then, as was mentioned at the end of the previous podcast, there have been 26 seasons of the show, and it is currently renewed through 2027, ensuring that it will have been on air for at least 30 years when it finally does end. Included in the deal they've got at the moment is a certain number of longer episodes for Paramount's streaming service. And when you consider that back in season 5 of South Park, the characters couldn't afford DVDs except Token, the rich kid, you can see just what a changing time in the world of entertainment, television, home media those 30 years have been and continue to be.
And then by season 60, you get a couple of children in the show looking bemusedly at each other and one saying, "What is he talking about, renting a DVD?"
I think one of the reasons for South Park's longevity is certainly that the two co-creators, Trey Parker and Matt Stone, have never got into any kind of falling out or legal battle over rights, which really does happen with practically everything with a couple of creators. They'll eventually come to loggerheads, unless one of them willingly takes something of a back seat quite early on, and that's what Matt Stone did. He was happy to sit back and leave the creative side to Trey Parker, and for the past more than 20 years, every episode of South Park has been written and directed by Trey Parker. The first season of the show was extremely striking because of its unique look and unique feel. Very edgy, very rude.
Very surreal.
Just coming completely out of the blue, like nothing that had ever been seen before. Obviously, the way was paved for the show, with animation not for children becoming something of a thing as we went through the 90s, very much starting with The Simpsons. And around the same time that South Park started, King of the Hill was around as well. It was slightly before Family Guy started, but all these kind of shows do have a lot to thank The Simpsons for. I've often thought, and sometimes said out loud, the first series of the show is so unexpected and so unique. It was always going to be a hard task to try and live up to it with further seasons, because it's never going to surprise and shock in quite the same way again. And really, the first season has always been my favourite because of those feelings I experienced when I was 14 and first watching it, and enjoying the humour, the surreality, the uniqueness of it. Trey Parker and Matt Stone themselves have said that they don't really like seasons 2 and 3 anymore, particularly season 3, which they describe as the season that almost killed them because the production was simultaneous with the 1999 movie South Park Bigger, Longer and Uncut. And I do think they kind of struggle to recreate the surreal, unique, funny, rude, striking ideas. And once we get into season 4, we start to get into satire and social commentary, and that's really how the show finds sustainability. I really do think it's one of those shows like The Simpsons that was good for a run of 12 to 15 seasons that were going to be extremely enjoyable, and if it carried on after that, it was inevitably going to lose something. Now, I can't say that South Park should have had fewer than 15 seasons, because 4 of the 10 episodes we're specifically going to talk about a bit are from seasons 13, 14 and 15, so they must have been worth doing, mustn't they? But since moving house, we bought the season 16 to 20 DVD set, a lot of the reason being that we needed Kyle. The season 1 to 5 set has Kenny on the side, 6 to 10 set has Cartman, 11 to 15 has Stan, and the three of them staring out at us from the DVD shelf without Kyle to complete the set was an abomination. So it's very nice to sit here and look at them all 4 together, as I'm doing now, and they certainly are, in many ways, an awesome foursome, and when you do see some without the others, it seems like there's something missing, because the 4 South Park Park Maine boys have become an iconic image over almost 30 years. Watching those season 16 to 20 episodes, a lot of the time there's a lot of very interesting satire and social commentary. The George Zimmerman stuff, for example, I was finding particularly interesting and thought-provoking, but it's not really that funny anymore, and that's where the show's kind of run out of steam. But still, they're renewing and forcing more. And that's the kind of culture that we're in nowadays, with what gets commissioned and made for TV and streaming. Things that have been going on for so long, South Park, The Simpsons, Family Guy, just don't get cancelled now. They get run into the ground, and fans watch them and remember how good they used to be and think they're still enjoying the show.
As you were just saying or implying, South Park keeps going by commenting on whatever's going on at the time, and that may be news items or trends or whatever. And one thing that they comment on is trends in entertainment, movies and TV and that kind of thing. And the interesting thing is you can actually track what the entertainment industry was like when South Park started, even without meaning to. It showed how there was still new, fresh, shocking things to be made, right through to now when it keeps getting recommissioned and using many of the same ideas over and over again and reminding fans of an episode they enjoyed many, many years ago. And I began to notice, watching this through with the episode Free Hat, which is on my top 10 list, which is all about, that you might not guess from the title, digitally remastering classics. Specifically, they talk about Star Wars and E.T., directors George Lucas and Steven Spielberg, and the boys end up going on a kind of crusade to stop them from remastering their collaboration, Raiders of the Lost Ark, which you can tell Trey Parker absolutely loves. And as Stan says, Stan very often being the voice of Trey Parker, when they have their digitally remastered film, don't watch it, you guys, it'll be terrible. What happens is that it's so terrible that it ends up destroying everyone who watches, which is the kind of humour you can expect from South Park. And during all that, they're commenting about how new ideas are running out, they're selling the same stuff, hitting the nostalgia buttons, making people want to buy what they've already loved before. The next thing I noticed was High School Musical in the episode Elementary School Musical, where they basically rip the crap out of High School Musical because it's so stupid, but it was a new idea more or less, and it was just about the last new thing that people really liked and was really popular, and that's why South Park took it off, because it was so much in the soup. And their comment on that is that it's really stupid and it really doesn't have any substance. It's just a bunch of singing and dancing. What does Cartman say after they watched it?
He no longer feels any connection with the world.
He's going to kill himself. Which isn't very funny, really, but in South Park it's not unexpected and it is kind of funny because of the overall tone. And then, again, with Stan as the voice of Trey Parker, we get everything looking like, the word I shall use is crap. He has his 10th birthday after a great many years of being 9 and thinks that when he listens to music it sounds like someone is taking a crap in his ears, and he thinks that the poster for Zookeeper 2 looks like a turd in a microwave, and he thinks that the silly film that there was about penguins is Jim Carrey has turds in his apartment. And it's a bit depressing watching that one because I so agree with Stan. Everything does just look like crap now. And poor Stan, he even goes off a lot of the things that he used to like, which I, and I think you, have managed not to do for the most part. But then those kinds of films evidently weren't very successful. They haven't become classics or anything that anybody bothers to talk about anymore. They apparently didn't go down very well. So after that, they started to rehash, if you want to use a negative word, revive, if you want to be a bit more positive about it, old things, classics. Particularly Disney bought a lot of franchises to make new Marvel Super superheroes, new Muppets, new Star Wars. There are many things being reheated in the microwave, things that weren't turds to begin with. But a lot of fans are reacting to these and enjoying these or wanting to enjoy them and so doing. And that's where we are now.
That bit with Stan thinking everything looks like crap is very relatable. It's the mid-season finale of season 15, and it really backs up my thought from earlier that season 15 is where the show should have ended. In that episode, everyone is admitting the show should be ending. It's being represented through Stan's parents' marriage falling apart, not for the first time. We keep going through the same thing and it's just getting stupider and stupider and I'm tired and I can't do it anymore. But all done in a very fun, amusing way. But it would have been the right place to stop. But then, of course, by the time we get the second half of season 15, they have agreed to renew the show yet again. And so Sharon Marsh is saying the best thing to do as you get older is stick with what you know and we're just going to carry on. And Stan finds that very depressing but goes along with it anyway. That hits home quite hard because it's very true, the observations that are being made. It was way back in season 8 in an episode called Quest for Ratings, where Stan, Kyle, and Cartman, not Kenny, and some of the other characters, the other boys from their class, were making a news show and sitting around trying to come up with ideas for it. But Cartman, speaking for Trey Parker, says, "I don't like having to come up with new ideas for new shows all the time. It hurts my head." And yet, for whatever reason, they have found the desire to carry on for another 20 years after that, and more, commenting along the way about how stupid it's becoming and how hard it is to do, to sustain. So whenever you do see New South Park now, it is kind of going through the motions. In the latest season, the 26th season, there were 2 episodes I thought were of particular interest. One lampooning Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, using a lot of Canada stuff, which is always funny on South Park. The other one about AI writing software being used in text messages and schoolwork. I thought those 2 were both relevant and amusing. So it still can occasionally hit the right notes, but like anything that's been dragging on for almost 30 years, it's not really sustainable. However, there are many episodes that we have enjoyed a great deal and continue to do so. And as was mentioned, Rosie has made a list of 10 particularly interesting, funny, relevant, memorable, good episodes to talk about. The first of these is the 8th episode of the first season, Starvin' Marvin.
Season 1 is, as you said, very different from everything that follows in many ways. I do think, though, that Starving Marvin lays a foundation for the satire that they get into. Starvin' Marvin is the kind of name for a character that you would not get away with in any ordinary television program. It's very much South Park style. And the thing that happens is that the boys adopt, i.e. agree to send money for a starving Ethiopian, and they do it to get a free watch, and instead of getting sent the watch, they get sent the starving Ethiopian, and they think he says his name is Marvin. It's something that sounds a bit like Marvin, and then Starvin' Marvin, and laugh at that, and they don't give him anything to eat, I notice, for a very long time after they've got him. But one thing that I remember as being very funny is the look of horror on Starvin' Marvin's face when the boys have taken him to an all-you-can-eat buffet, and once Cartman's finished with his appetizer and there's still quite a lot left, ready to move on to his main course, he just chucks them all in the bin. And it's humorous, but it's also making a very poignant point about waste and about how there is enough for everyone, but it's not being equally divided.
Yeah, that is so true, and it is very effective satire about, as you were saying, wasting food in America and the attitudes of people in the richer countries to the starving Ethiopians, and indeed to poorer people in their own country. It's got the bit where they're thinking of how to distribute the donated canned goods to the poor people of South Park, and they end up putting Kenny in like the Crystal Dome with a load of canned food and see what he can catch in a certain amount of time, not really thinking of the poorer people as real people. when you were talking about how they first meet and name Starvin Marvin, it reminded me something I do notice about the first series is the dynamic between the four boys, the kind of original intention of that. Trey Parker and Matt Stone have said, well, it's supposed to be more realistic how these 8-year-olds are really going to talk to each other. Perhaps they do swear a bit more than people of that sort of age would in real life, just a little bit more. But the dynamic they have of insulting each other, teasing each other, ribbing each other, but also they obviously all really care about each other, does ring very true in that series without too much differentiation between the characters of the different boys. But also in the first series, you can see the seeds of Cartman is the hell child, and the others are going to grow to ostracize him in many ways, because he does do the most extreme things in that series, but it never gets carried too far. He doesn't get separated too much from his core group of friends, as they are at that point. You see it in a lot of things. Traits and inclinations here and there get magnified as things go on. They do get more kind of individual characteristics and uses in the show. Kyle becomes very much the crusader against things going wrong in the world and being very vocal about it. Stan is the sort of quiet everyman who things happen to and he gets depressed and accepts it. Cartman becomes an absolute psycho and doesn't really have very good dynamics, relationships with anyone else, including what's supposed to be his 3 absolute best friends. I've always liked the first series for the original dynamics and interplay. I think it's a shame to lose them, really. Although, in some of these episodes, some of those old dynamics, friendship, do come back, which is always a good thing. The second episode on this list of 10 is the 15th episode of Season 3, which is called Mr. Hankey's Christmas Classics. And it's not a regular episode. It's a series of animated shorts to go along with the songs from the Christmas album that was released, Mr. Hankey's Christmas Classics, involving many of the regular South Park characters.
I find it very memorable. I think it's really sweet. They put a twist on the different Christmas songs. For instance, I always remember Cartman singing Oh Holy Night, and it ends up about him getting presents and pie. They have Jesus and Santa doing some kind of lounge singing and getting into a bust-up about how few Santa Christmas songs there are compared to Jesus Christmas songs, which is kind of silly but very fun. It begins, of course, with a kind of twist on Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, which begins words to the effect of, you've heard of Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer and Frosty the Snowman, and I don't know who else, but do you know Mr. Hankey, whom we met in Season 1, Mr. Hankey the Christmas Pooh, which is about as silly as it sounds, and it wraps up with Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas, which is very sweet. You see the 4 boys all putting their arms around each other during the through the years we'll always be together bit. And in that song, they remember friends who are dear to us, specifically Mary Kay Bergman, who was the voice of all the female characters in seasons 1 through 3 and South Park Bigger, Longer and Uncut, and sadly committed suicide, much to the sorrow of many people, I'm sure, including Matt Stone and Trey Parker, and not just because they had lost an asset.
Channel 4 thought that was so much not a proper episode, they never showed it. It was several years later on Sky 1 that I first found it, and even there they chopped out Mr. Garrison's song, which they thought was just too rude to broadcast, and the part of Satan's song in Hell about Princess Diana. They obviously didn't want to air that in the UK. But I remember watching that montage with faithful friends who were dear to us, and it has the clips of all the female characters, practically all the female characters. Bebe has always been someone else from the crew, but really all the mums and Wendy and Mrs. Crabtree, the bus driver, and the mayor. And I thought, why are they showing all this? Oh, of course, it must have been shortly after Mary Kay Bergman committed suicide, and this is their tribute to her.
The song by Mr. Garrison is kind of racist. It's about how religions which don't celebrate Christmas and aren't Christianity are kind of wrong. But that's not what the overall message is. The overall message is that Mr. Garrison is wrong. He is a character who is used to show really outrageous attitudes that real people have, and that Trey Parker in particular would like the audience to disagree with.
So much so that he ends up becoming Donald Trump in the South Park universe. And I thought it was a shame for the show when he wasn't really on it for 4 years, because he was off being the president. And the latest new episode, as we record this podcast, had Mr. Garrison campaigning for his 2024 election bid.
Now, some of that stuff with Mr. Garrison as Donald Trump did amuse me in the end when he won the election. You think it went a bit far, don't you? Mr. Garrison actually as president, but in the build-up to the election, he was saying some very amusing things like, every time I do something awful, people just get more stoked on me, and there's still a chance, are you kidding me?
It would have worked very well as part of South Park as a whole if, as they had planned, Hillary Clinton had won that election. South Park had chanced their arm once too often there. They made an episode about Barack Obama winning the presidential election in 2008 before he had, and he did, so they were all right. But just to prove that the show has gone on too long, in 2016 they were relying on Donald Trump getting defeated by Hillary Clinton for the entire serialized season 20 to make sense. Donald Trump actually ended up winning, and so all their plans went out of the window. The season is very odd to watch with the continuity, and Mr. Garrison is put out of commission, really, as a South Park character for 4 years, while he's being President of the United States. The best place for Mr. Garrison is at the front of the classroom with Mr. Hat or Mr. Slave being the teacher, and it was reassuring to see him there in the latest season in that role in the AI episode, not realising that all the work he was getting handed in that he thought was so brilliant had been written by artificial intelligence. The third episode on this list is the one we've already mentioned, Free Hat, which is the 9th episode of Season 6. Now, Season 6 is the one without Kenny. After 5 seasons, they were deliberately after a bit of a shake-up and looking to replace one of the 4 main characters with Butters. Apparently, there was talk of replacing Kyle with Butters, and there is an episode where Kyle is apparently a diabetic, and that has never been mentioned before or since, and they were going to have Kyle succumb to his diabetes at the end of season 5, but then they realised, no, actually, we'd prefer to get rid of Kenny because we're running out of ways for him to die in every episode. It's getting a very tired joke, so we'll get rid of Kenny and replace him with Butters.
I noticed in season 5 Kenny was only appearing in the episode to die and really not having anything to do with the plot.
I always really liked Kenny dies in every episode as a surreal aspect of the show, and even after they brought him back for season 7, which was a very wise decision, he does occasionally, sporadically, still die, which is always a nice nod back to original South Park. But of course he can be used in other ways and doesn't always have to die. Of course, as it turned out, replacing Kenny with Butters in season 6 didn't even work out that well, because Butters gets replaced as the 4th one in the group with Tweak, who first appeared in the penultimate episode of season 2, and Tweak is the 4th member of the gang in Free Hat.
I did earlier explain the premise of Free Hat, but that's not what made me put it on the list, really. It was Tweak. I find Tweak very, very funny. I think, like Butters, you could sort of get bored of him if he was overused, but occasional use of Tweak really cracks me up. I relate to him, rather. He doesn't like pressurized situations, having to remember things, having to do things for school. He's introduced as the 5th member of the group to make a presentation for Mr. Garrison, and he's saying, "It's too much pressure!" And I know exactly how he feels. And he spends this Free Hat episode absolutely freaking out about all the things that they're trying to do. by promising to give away a free hat with their meeting about not remastering films. Poor Tweak has to make the hats out of newspaper. They were just going to start a club, now we have to make hats, where will it end? And then there's a misunderstanding about the meaning of free hat. There's a group who want to free from prison a serial murderer of babies whose name is Hat, and to try and get what they want with this George Lucas, Steven Spielberg stuff, the boys kind of agree that they can help each other, and they end up on television getting asked why they support toddler murder. There's a caption underneath Tweak saying, advocate of toddler murder, and he's going, oh God, get me out of here, and stuff like that, which just makes me laugh so much. And how many babies did Hat kill? 20-something? Yeah, but it was in self-defense. Those kind of jokes just make me laugh, and that's why I put it on my list of favourites. But also I do agree that messing about with beloved films is a terrible thing to do.
I definitely agree about Tweak. Occasional use of him is extremely funny. But yeah, every week he's not really sustainable, and he doesn't last as long as Butters did in that role. By the time we're getting into the closing stages of season 6, they're really bringing back Kenny already, having him inhabiting Cartman's body after Cartman drinks his ashes thinking it's chocolate milk mix, and coming back on screen at the end of the final episode of season 6, and they're like, oh hey Kenny, where have you been? Oh, just over there. Occasional use of Tweak still works very well. Of course, he and Craig have become notable in recent years as South Park's same-sex couple, and they've done some rather fun on-screen work together. Butters I've more than had enough of, even by Series 6, particularly episodes about Butters being manipulated by Cartman. And really, the very best formula for South Park is Stan, Kyle, Cartman and Kenny working together against the world to try to achieve something. And there's at least one episode which follows that pattern to come on this list. The next episode on the list, though, is Crazy Cripples, which is the second episode of season 7. And in stark contrast to what I just said, this really only features Stan, Kyle, Cartman and Kenny in cameo roles, because it's all about Jimmy and Timmy.
They're saying, glad we kept out of that and all that kind of thing, as though they know the audience expects them to be leading the episode. Whereas down the line, we're not at all surprised to see some other South Park resident leading the episode, and very little of the boys, and not even necessarily all 4 of them. I wrote Crazy Cripples down first because it's so very funny. The humour is very, very near the knuckle. Characters with disabilities are portrayed as looking a certain way, sounding a certain way, moving a certain way. Let's not forget, though, that South Park treats these characters absolutely as human beings, people, complex characters, whilst not shying away from how different they may look, sound and move.
Which is indeed what Timmy's debut episode in season 4 is all about, and it's consistently true.
Timmy and Jimmy are seen together very often after Jimmy is introduced. They are hanging out together by Crazy Cripples, and Jimmy, of course, because he can, does most of the talking. Timmy is really only saying Timmy by then. If you look at earlier episodes, he says other things such as please help me, but anyway, Jimmy can speak fluently. And what's going on? He is upset about Christopher Butthole Reeve coming and getting so much attention for having had an accident and become, as they say, crippled. And what the fuss is all about is stem cells, and these seeming to be doing Christopher Reeve a lot of good. And of course, because it's South Park, the way that he gets the stem cells into his body is by breaking open the neck of a fetus and sucking the insides out of it. Jimmy, with Timmy, then wants to start a club called the Crips for people who have been crippled, disabled from birth, and ends up getting caught up in this gang warfare between the Crips and the Bloods. And I just absolutely laugh at the bit where he's innocently doing a jigsaw puzzle at home, and then a drive-by shooter drives by and shoots up his whole house. Jimmy's reaction is, Jesus Christ, he wasn't expecting that at all. Another funny thing is when they're supposed to hop some punk-ass bloods, which means kill members of the rival gang, but Jimmy thinks that they want soda pop and treats. And he and Timmy walking or wheeling in front of a truck makes it crash into the gas station and blow up a very large number of bloods. And that's how they get into the gang, and they've got no idea what's going on this whole time.
Yes, that is all extremely funny. It's true that Timmy and Jimmy are very well done because you're never laughing at them, but at characters' reactions to them. The next episode on the list is the 8th episode of season 10, Make Love, Not Warcraft.
A very nice thing about that episode is the four boys are being friends, hanging out, and what they are doing is playing World of Warcraft. There's a guy with absolutely no life sitting in a chair brushing potato chip crumbs off his tummy and stuff, going into World of Warcraft and overriding the etiquette that you have to agree to duel with him and just killing everybody's characters. And they do it kind of like an epic film, and they talk about their characters dying as though it's actual life and death. Randy Marsh, Stan's father, gets involved, taking Stan a special sword, dying and giving it to Stan, and they treat it like it's a real sacrifice. They get to that stage by Cartman deciding to do something and coming and telling his friends, you can just play out here in the sunshine, or you can do something that really matters and get on World of Warcraft and defeat this guy.
By killing boars in the forest for 13 weeks to get enough experience points.
So we see them sitting there, clicking away, not moving anything but their fingers, getting very unhealthy looking, very spotty and dirty. Cartman won't get up to go to the bathroom when he's going to have diarrhea again. He shouts, "Man, bathroom, bathroom!" And Leanne Cartman, who will do anything that Cartman tells her to, something else that sometimes gets taken too far, brings him a bowl in which to defecate.
Yes, it does successfully satirise all this living online, gaming being life to these young gamers. The sort of time when we were both surprised by people we were babysitting saying they were going to meet someone.
At the blacksmiths.
They weren't going to meet them at all. This one particularly made me think of something you said on a previous podcast about Cartman being almost two different characters, the protagonist and the antagonist. And it's always much better when he is a protagonist and part of the group of the four main protagonists. As you say, Cartman really is a driving force in this one. When he throws himself into something, really wants to do something, achieve a goal, he will do anything, whatever it takes. And that includes inspiring his friends to join in cases like this one. Of course, that really works well as a collaborative character piece. Cartman gets to be the one in that who delivers the final death blow. Looks like you're about to get paid. Whack him with the hammer after the special magic sword has sapped most of his life force and everyone else has been killed. Cartman's earned that final death blow moment. It also makes good use of, as you said, Stan's father Randy, and he is a character who has at times been very overused in the show. You were talking about Stan being the voice of Trey Parker, which is much better than Randy being the voice of Trey Parker, which seems to have happened more and more as Trey Parker himself has got older. Many episodes about Randy being stupid are rather repetitive and predictable. Little occasional use of him being rather stupid but helping out the plot in Make Love, Not Warcraft works very well in that way. But when we get into the seasons 20-something and it's all about Randy buying Integrity Farms and selling weed and really leading the show, I think everyone admitted they were getting rather bored of Randy leading the show and the show moving away from the kid characters as the main protagonists. We don't see much of Integrity Farms anymore, although there was, in the latest 26th season of 6 episodes, one whole episode devoted to Randy as the protagonist buying a Japanese toilet and being all silly about it. And really, that was my least favourite episode of the season. Next, we have the 5th episode of season 11, which is called Fantastic Easter Special, and is the return to the series of the character Jesus, who has not been seen since the season finale of season 6. Quite a gap there.
That one is on the list purely because it makes me laugh so much. What inspired it was the Da Vinci Code. This is making me think how transient all these things are. World of Warcraft isn't the thing anymore, remastering films isn't the thing anymore, the Da Vinci Code isn't the thing anymore, but there was an awful lot of fuss about it at the time. It was mentioned in The Vicar of Dibley too, and obviously Trey Parker thinks it's a very silly conspiracy theory. Jesus was married to Mary Magdalene, and his own idea for a silly Bible conspiracy theory is that St. Peter was actually a rabbit. Quite a convincing argument, really, that the Pope's hat makes no sense unless it was originally designed for a rabbit. And this group of people who maintain the memory of Jesus' wish that the Pope should be a rabbit, of course, has Randy in it. Stan ends up with the responsibility of keeping Snowball, the cute little white bunny, from the Catholic Church, who wish him harm because they don't want people to know that Jesus wanted a rabbit to be Pope. Stan enlists the help of Kyle in protecting this rabbit, and some way into the episode, Jesus returns. They're arguing about what Jesus wanted, and there he is saying, "Who are you to say that?" And it turns out he did want a rabbit to be Pope. There's a scene at the end where Snowball is sitting in the Pope's chair with the Pope's hat on, and they're asking him, "What should we tell people about how to run their lives?" He's not saying anything, just like Jesus wanted. Well, actually, that makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? But another one of those very, very silly scenes that makes me laugh is where Kyle and Jesus have locked up together. Jesus wants to get out and go and talk to the people, and he plans to do this by being resurrected. He tells Kyle, "You're going to have to kill me," and he gives him some sort of horrible sharp thing to stab him in the neck. And so, though it'll be quick, just stab me in the neck, and Kyle very reluctantly does stab Jesus in the neck, and then he's clutching his throat and staggering around, gasping and gurgling.
Kyle says there to Jesus, "Eric Cartman can never find out about it." Jesus says, "I understand," referencing there a lot of Cartman as the antagonist situations being very anti-Semitic, and Kyle's Jewish faith being something he rips on and at times incites others to rally against. That's some of my least favourite use of Cartman. When Jesus is lying on the floor having been shanked in the neck and bled to death, and Kyle's going, "Jesus?" He doesn't feel very comfortable about the situation. But I do love that bit where Jesus returns in that episode. Stan and Kyle go, "Jesus!" in the joyful way they do. But I've always really enjoyed Jesus as a character on South Park. We first see him in season 1 as the host of the talk show Jesus and Pals, and it turns out during the course of the series, yes, he really is actually Jesus, and now he's living in South Park and hosting this talk show, doing various other things around the town. I've always really enjoyed the bit in the Millennium episode. "Are you there, God? It's me, Jesus." Everyone's expecting Jesus to put on something big for New Year's Eve 1999. Ends up being a concert by Rod Stewart, who's actually catatonic. But I love the news report in that one. We're at the end of the millennium, nearly New Year's Eve 1999, and thousands of people have come seeking Jesus here at his house in South Park, which is really very funny and surreal. It took me a few years to notice that Jesus isn't actually in the movie. Satan is in the movie, but they probably thought putting Jesus in the movie was going a bit too far for cinema wider distribution. Now we get into those episodes from seasons 13, 14 and 15 as promised. The first episode of season 13 is called The Ring.
That episode is led by Kenny. One characteristic which is early on established, besides that he dies all the time, is that he is quite highly sexed, very interested in girls, more advanced than his friends in that area, knows more about it, is able to answer things like, "What's a dildo?"
When Cartman comes up with the name Finger Bang for his boy band, Dan and Kyle are like, what does that mean? And Cartman's like, oh, it's when you get your finger and pretend it's a gun, finger bang, 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 bang. And Kenny's laughing and saying, that's not what it means.
We haven't mentioned Kenny's voice in his parka, the hood obscuring his mouth, and when he says anything, except when he's not wearing the parka, that's how he sounds, and for some, it adds a certain level of humour that you can't hear exactly what he's saying about finger bang and dildos and what have you.
Apparently the real Kenny from Trey Parker's childhood did wear his coat like that and sound indistinct, and perhaps only his three best friends could really understand him very well. And he used to skip school a lot, and Trey and his friends would say, where's Kenny? Oh, he's dead. He wasn't really, he just used to cut school, and that's where the joke of Kenny dies in every episode came from.
In fact, he dies in the ring of herpes. What he's been after is oral sex, quite frankly, from this girl Tammy, who gets riled up by the Jonas Brothers, so he hopes that taking her to a Jonas Brothers concert will get her in the mood. But when she's asked backstage, the Jonas Brothers produce purity rings for her and a few other girls to wear, so that they can sell sex to little girls without the little girls or their parents realising. And it does amuse me when Kenny goes with Tammy and these other girls and the door is shut in his face. He's not allowed to meet the Jonas Brothers with them, and he says, you can very much understand, I bought the effing tickets. But the very funny thing is when the boss turns up, and it's Mickey Mouse, swearing like a sailor and telling the Jonas Brothers to get out there and make me some goddamn money, And my favourite bit possibly is where he thinks the boys are spy saboteurs from DreamWorks and he's threatening them with a chainsaw and he's saying, you lie and I'll cut you up,
Of course, with the show being so surreal, they can have the young characters occasionally having these sexual experiences to make a point. Kenny and Tammy and the BJ is a good example. There's a whole episode about Kyle's little brother Ike, who is in kindergarten having a sexual affair with his teacher. That one is extremely surreal, but very funny as well. There's Jimmy buying a prostitute in order to try and cure his random erections, which is also a very funny episode about evading this pimp around Denver in the taxi. It's not in poor taste, it's just really part of the surreality that makes South Park what it is. Stan, Kyle and Cartman are working very hard together in that one to help Kenny, to save Kenny, which is nice to see the three of them working together to help their friend. Stan and Kyle, of course, are said most of the time to have a best friendship. It's very rocky at times. I always like it when Cartman and Kenny seem to have kind of a best friendship. Often in the early episodes, they're kind of thrown together as a pair when Stan and Kyle are off as a pair. For example, when they go off and build rival clubhouses in season 2. But Cartman and Kenny do actually have something in common, which is a wicked, crass, extreme sense of humour. They enjoy laughing together at things like trying to find the brown noise on the recorder to make everyone crap their pants.
Getting Kenny's school picture taken with his butt in the hood of his parka instead of his face.
And I do like it when they come back to that Cartman and Kenny common ground and actual tangible friendship, possible best friendship, which they often forget about as the show goes on. I was pleased in the latest season, as we record this podcast, the latest season, season 26, when Cartman and Kenny did something substantial together, opening this hot dog stand, which ended up being a satire on working from home, working in inverted commas, as it sometimes is, apparently, and America having lost its work ethic after all the quarantine, lockdowns, pandemic. But in that one, Cartman and Kenny sit on the sofa together with their juice boxes and absolutely kill themselves laughing together because they've got the news reporter to say Dick and Balls on the television because it's the name of their hot dog stand. A nice, silly, childish friendship moment there between Cartman and Kenny that I did enjoy. I do like to see Kenny with his hood down sometimes. Cartman has t-shirts made for himself and Kenny, and they're off with their sunglasses, enjoying their success, and Kenny's got his hood down, and he and Cartman are getting along together. I did enjoy that. I do like the character in The Ring, Tammy Warner. I think she's well done, well realised, well designed, well voiced. They kind of need her as a guest girl to lead that episode and show us how Disney is appealing to little girls by selling them sex and disguising it with the purity rings. Most episodes that have girls' issues at the centre do use a more regular character, Wendy Testerberger, and when I was first watching season 1, I thought, well, yeah, she's going to be the main girl character, isn't she? That makes sense. You've got the 4 main boys, but you want a girl who's featured quite a lot from their class, and Wendy is the one. And she is the most featured, but they don't actually use her that much, and her appearances, substantial appearances, are rather sporadic. I like the couple of episodes she kind of leads about girls' issues, standing up for girls' issues. There's stupid spoiled hall video playset in season 8, where Wendy is disapproving of people like Paris Hilton making all the classmates dress up in inappropriate clothing and act all sexual and talk all sexual and grow up too fast. I do find that one particularly rings true. The clothes that Bebe and the other girls in the class are wearing and having their stupid sex party. It's very much the sort of thing that the year 6 girls at the primary school where I was working and spending a lot of time at that point used to wear to the discos and so on. The other one with Wendy fighting for female rights is a lot later episode called The Hobbit, where she's distressed that the girls want to Photoshop pictures of themselves to make themselves look more attractive. They can't love their individualities. And that one's very funny in places with Mr. Mackey and the Jelly School and so on. Like Trey Parker, Stan kind of picks up and puts down his relationship with Wendy as he thinks of it. One of the episodes in the latest 26th season that I keep mentioning, the AI episode, featured Stan and Wendy's relationship as part of the plot. It turns out Wendy has been sending Stan very supportive texts about things that have been going on in the series. I hope your dad's okay now. I hope you're doing okay. And Stan's just been replying with a thumbs up every time, and that rings very true when you're trying to connect with people, communicate with people, and they're just making no effort in return. It's very disheartening. Of course, Stan starts using AI to reply to Wendy, and at least in that episode, Stan does start feeling guilty when he sees the results of this, and does worry about Wendy getting caught for having AI on her phone in school, which he is actually put there, but it's still not that good for Stan as a character, that sort of relationship. Next, we have the 8th episode of season 13, Dead Celebrities. The Ring is the season opener. Dead Celebrities is the mid-season opener for the same season. They both lead a group of 7 episodes, which is how they made it for many, many years in chunks of 7 episodes. So they're obviously both supposed to be strong, enticing, let's stick with the series episodes, and they must be because they made it onto this list. We had noticed that a lot of celebrities seemed to be dying off in the inter-season break in 2009, including Michael Jackson, Don DeLuise, Patrick Swayze, Natasha Richardson, various others that we weren't particularly aware of. But there's a lot of them there, on the plane in limbo, trying to get to the afterlife, and not managing because of Michael Jackson.
Now, I like a lot of characters in South Park. If you ask me who's your favourite, I think the first one to come to mind would be Ike Groflovsky, Kyle's little brother. In Dead Celebrities, he's telling Kyle, "Make Billy Mays go away," and things like that, and he tells the psychiatrist in The Sixth Sense takeoff, "I see dead celebrities." They get children to do the voice, different children on different days, different years as they grow up. And I think that's very effective, having real children's voices saying real children's things in this really bizarre-looking, stylized animation.
It's true for the other kindergartners, like you were referencing earlier about the, what's he talking about, rent-a-DVD. That's Fillmore and another kindergartner. The mountain lion cubs in Woodland Critter Christmas, they're the real children. The goth kid, who's the kindergartner. Just adds a lot to the show having these real children's voices doing those characters.
Ike goes to Kyle for help. He tries his parents first of all, which brings me to something that I want to say. I think the Broflovsky parents, and particularly Sheila, their mother, are the best parents. Sheila's very strict, and Cartman famously calls her a bitch and sings a song about it a couple of times, but she makes nice food for them. Kyle is telling his cousin Kyle how delicious his mom's stew is. She takes Ike to the new Harry Potter movie and asks Kyle does he want to go. She organises a nice birthday for him at Casa Bonita, and usually they seem the most interested in their children's problems. Gerald, to give him his due, gets Kyle out of being a human Sentai pad. However, in Dead Celebrities, because Kyle and his friends are going to get Ike out of the situation of being haunted by all these celebrities, Gerald and Sheila are somewhat dismissive. So they try and check it out, and there's a takeoff of Poltergeist with that character explaining in the famous raspy voice the celebrities are stuck, and it's like being on an aeroplane that won't take off because one of the celebrities won't accept that he's dead. And then we are reintroduced to Michael Jackson, who of course did not escape South Park and its satire and its, in some cases, rather personal humour. We met him previously in another very funny episode, and Trey Parker seems to want to suggest that Michael Jackson wasn't actually a paedophile, as people were saying at the time. He just hadn't managed to grow up. He had been messed up by being thrust into the limelight as a child. So, to free Ike of these celebrities who are haunting him, they have to help Michael Jackson to cross over, to finish his unfinished business. He has, as part of his refusal to cross over, possessed Ike. I knew I was a child. And he wants to be recognised as a little white girl, so they enter him into one of those rather questionable little girl beauty pageants.
"Mommy, that hurts my cheek implant," one of the contestants says to her overbearing mother. It is a good half-season leader, that. It's very funny, very relevant to what's been going on in the world. It was the episode I was thinking of when I said there was at least one on the list where the four core boys are working together as friends and allies to achieve a goal, in this case to help Ike. Cartman says he particularly wants to do it to help Billy Mays, whose infomercials he used to enjoy. But he certainly gets into it and comes up with the winning stroke of telling the judge of the beauty pageant about Chipotle Away, which makes sense as part of the narrative of the whole episode.
Again, it's Cartman who has the idea and is able to manipulate the situation.
You were telling me when you were watching it through how you admired Cartman for his can-do attitude, like Eleanor the chipmunk has. He'll just do anything, put himself through anything to try and achieve what he wants, including dressing up as a tarty teenager on the Maury Parvett show to try and win a prize.
He does do a lot of dressing up, of course, and because his design is very different from the standard base of all the other children, you can dress up yourself on a few different internet dress-up games. You can always tell it's him, which is very effective. Particularly, though, I was thinking about how I admired his confidence, his gift of gab, when he was doing the hostage negotiations for holding all the tortured little baby cows that they didn't want made into veal.
Even quite early on in the production of the show, Trey Parker and Matt Stone were admitting we kind of identify more with Cartman than Stan and Kyle, as it turns out. And he often does become the mouthpiece for the show. And I find I do very much identify with Cartman, some of the ways he feels about what's going on in the world and what his friends are doing. It was on South Park Night on Channel 4, just before they showed Season 2, that we saw Trey Parker and Matt Stone say, yeah, we've realised there's more Cartman in us than anyone else nowadays. And I think perhaps there's a little Cartman in all of us, particularly when he is used well and not just lazily as a complete antagonist. Next we have the 7th episode of Season 14, Crippled Summer. Another Jimmy-heavy episode.
You see a great many disabled people at summer camp, including kind of Porky Pig and a kind of Elmer Fudd guy, which is possibly not something everyone would like to see. But again, they're not laughed at. They're real people and they have real feelings and they're just trying to enjoy their summer camp. What's going on there at summer camp is running parallel with Towelie, who was introduced originally as a satire on how much merch these shows produce, because he is a literal piece of merch, a towel with a face on it, and he's also a drug addict. It's taking off a show where you televise some poor person's intervention to try and help them get off drugs. And where the two stories intersect is that Towelie is the towel, apparently the only towel, for drying the campers after they're swimming and such at summer camp. And he's off doing drugs and gets fired from that job pretty quickly.
I do enjoy occasional use of Towelie. That debut of his was in season 5, and he has cropped up ever since, including on Integrity Farms, and they perhaps did overuse him there as a weed connoisseur.
The main boys and Butters are doing Towelie's intervention, bringing along his son Washcloth that he had with a human woman. While at summer camp, Nathan is sick of his team never winning any of the competitive activities such as canoeing and orienteering and all this summer camp stuff that they do, and he gets Mimsy to sabotage Jimmy's team, which he shouldn't do because Mimsy always misunderstands. For instance, he puts the snake in the wrong canoe, in his own team's canoe.
Not in our canoe, Mimsy.
The one I like is when he's supposed to blow the shark whistle under the water, swim in the water and then blow the whistle. So he swims in the water, comes out, and then blows the whistle, which is a mating call for this shark who leaps onto the beach and humps Nathan, because of course Nathan is always the victim of Mimsy's mistakes. And what does amuse me very much is the copy that comes up about Towelie and his drugs that they obviously have on this intervention show. These things are also coming up at summer camp with factoids about the shark with its 9-inch long penis, and it says things like Mimsy was supposed to blow the whistle while still in the water. There seems to have been a fundamental misunderstanding, sort of stating the obvious about what's going on with Nathan and Mimsy and Jimmy, which really adds something to the humour, I find. Nathan's frustration with Mimsy has caused a temporary lapse in judgment. He plays the note on the ukulele himself that Jimmy couldn't manage to play, thus triggering an explosion of the ukulele. There's another one of his plans that backfires.
I do like that crippled summer camp stuff very much. It is very funny. Effective satire with Councillor Steve. Nathan knows what to say to shut him up when he comes and says, "Are you boys enjoying the fun beach?" and things like that in a really patronising way. Nathan can say to him, "Yes, Councillor Steve, the beach is warm." And Councillor Steve's quite happy to think, "Oh yes, the simple-minded crippled kids are happy." But of course, actually, he doesn't realise they're planning these intricate things to get to Jimmy. Mimsy going, "The shark's going to bite off his legs and then he'll bleed to death. He's going to bleed to death." And Nathan going, "Shh," and then they're shutting up Councillor Steve. Of course, when Nathan and Mimsy return in an episode called Handicraft, there's a bit of character development for Mimsy. He's actually telling Nathan and the surly cab drivers when they're full of crap at times. That's Nathan versus Timmy rather than Jimmy, Handicraft. Because it's later, post-season 15, taking off the wacky races and all the parents watching it in their pyjamas with cereal, it's not actually that funny, and just reminds you how South Park used to work as a comedy, but does still kind of work as a satire. The final episode on this list is the 10th episode of season 15, Bass to Mouth, which is sometimes more helpfully referred to as the WikiLeaks episode.
We've already met Lemmywinks as the class gerbil in season 6 in an episode called Death Camp of tolerance. We don't see Lemmy-Winks in this Bast-to-Mouth episode for quite a long time, nor do we see his brother WikiLeaks for quite a long time. It's set up as a mystery as to who he is. Someone posting private, embarrassing scandals on a website within South Park Elementary. Stan sent an email to Kenny about seeing some girl's butt crack in gym class. That's a thing that upsets Wendy, like you were talking about. Stan not really doing their relationship very well. It begins with a boy who crapped his pants in class, and there's a recording of the phone conversation the nurse has with his mother about how he's going to need fresh underpants and pants and socks. And a lot of what's going on is the staff trying to avoid a repeat of the last time this happened where the student killed themselves. So what do? They approach Cartman because they know that he can get things done. Now, his first idea is to give a girl in his class laxatives to make her crap her pants because his objective is to stop this boy from killing himself, and is surprised when he realises no one can crap their pants and no one can kill themselves. The staff are like, yeah, that's right. But in fact, no one crapping their pants, as Cartman realises, is as good as everyone or nearly everyone crapping their pants, and that is his plan. Pizza Friday with laxatives. Enough students will crap their pants that no one will be singled out. And I think that's a very good example of how Cartman can think through any situation outside the box, and how everyone knows this, even people in authority who ordinarily would try to stop him from using those kinds of talents. And a very amusing bit is when this gerbil, WikiLeaks, is going around with a little video camera. Mr. Mackey sees that they're being videoed by this gerbil that doesn't react any differently than if it was a person with a camera, catching them discussing this plan to give all the students laxatives. We've already seen WikiLeaks at that point. The boys are able to track him to the computer lab, open the door and see this little gerbil typing at the computer. And from there, we learn that this is WikiLeaks, Lemmy-Wink's brother. We learn this from King Frog, who is a ghost of an animal that was shoved up Mr. Slave's ass, which is what happened to Lemmy-Winks when we first met him, and these ghosts of dead creatures guided him up through the digestive system, and the episode finishes with Lemmy-Winks coming out through Mr. Slave's mouth. Now, Lemmy-Winks isn't actually taking any notice of King Frog. He's running around in his wheel. Some child has him in his bedroom at this point. So, Catatafish has to go and get the South Park students, it's not just the 4 boys, it's a whole bunch of them, to take Lemmy-Winks to the computer lab, where his destiny is to fight and kill WikiLeaks. Lemmy-Winks really isn't taking any notice, doesn't seem particularly bothered about WikiLeaks, but when they see each other, these two gerbils circle each other, leap at each other's throats, squeaking, and I absolutely burst out laughing at that, and I've come to realise that you might very well have wondered why at the time, because you don't happen to remember when we were looking after 2 hamsters and put them on our mum's bed to see what they would do, and they attacked each other. But it reminded me so much of that, and it added to this idea that Lemmy-Winks really wasn't in it personally. These 2 hamsters didn't have any personal grudge between them, and neither did the 2 gerbils. And eventually Lemmy-Winks kills WikiLeaks by biting his throat, and then sort of wanders off completely not bothered, and King Frog makes me laugh by still insisting that Lemmy-Winks is emotionally involved, saying he's devastated.
Yes, he's devastated. Yeah, the ghosts agree with him. But actually, yes, it's just what 2 rodents do if you stick it together.
Now, I noticed when I made my list, obviously I don't miss Chef, who in the first series certainly was one of the main characters. He'll have been in Starvin' Marvin, but not so that he's worth a mention. He's not in most of those episodes, particularly the later ones, after Isaac Hayes, who was the voice of Chef, has left the show.
Yes, it was a complicated situation, that, because he was recovering from a stroke, and the Church of Scientology quit on his behalf.
Isaac Hayes left the show, therefore Chef left the show. However, he hadn't been in it very much, only sporadically, for a long time before that. In season 1, he is the boys' main support network. He's the adult that they go to with their questions and their problems, and he's very involved in many of the episodes.
He is actually in every episode of season 1, and then the further we go through the seasons, the fewer he's in. And the last season where Isaac Hayes provides new voice work is season 9, in only one episode, Die Hippie Die, which is also about Cartman achieving a goal at the behest of the adults, clearing the town of this hippie festival. That's another of Cartman's groups that he likes to persecute and trash, hippies.
So really, for me, I can take or leave Chef. When he is there, he's amusing. He helps the boys out, particularly in those early episodes. He plays his part. He's fine to watch. I did notice he doesn't sing a song in Mr. Hankey's Christmas Classics, which I was quite surprised about, because singing the boys a little song is a big thing that he does.
Yeah, he appears less, and he sings less when he does appear, kind of losing his USP. That did disappoint me first watching through it, Chef disappearing from the show, becoming much less important, because he was such an integral part of season 1 that I'd enjoyed so much. One of my favourite things he comes out with is in the dance-off episode, where he reckons the only chance for Stan and his dance troupe to win against the Orange County really good dance-off troupe is to hope that the other team comes down with cancer or something.
That reminds me of the Goth Kids, because one of the members of that very eclectic dance troupe is one of the Goth Kids. They're amusing, with their dark outlook on life and their cynical comments. And after their first episode, in which they were being depressed with Stan after Wendy dumped him, they come back every now and then.
And they really are actually a good, effective, emotional support network for each other, despite having been kind of thrown together as outcasts and becoming goths. They've really embraced it and made something positive out of it.
They're heavily involved in satirising Twilight, the trend for dressing a certain way and calling yourself a vampire, and drinking clamato juice. They're also very interested in the cult of Cthulhu, which brings me back to Kenny. There's a bit more I want to say about the kind of mythos of Kenny and his indestructibility, which is explored in a 3-parter about Mysterion. Now, we've already met Mysterion in an episode called The Coon. Cartman is the Coon. Everyone knows it's him. As I said, when he dresses up, you can always tell it's him.
And of course it's a raccoon costume. Has nothing to do with the other connotation that the name throws up.
Mysterion is being a much more successful, mysterious Batman-type character. We don't learn in that episode who it is. It's got that base child design. The joke at the end is that he takes off his mask and everyone recognises him. Of course, dramatically, all the children are different. You did suggest that perhaps not everyone would that easily recognise Kenny because he goes around with his parka hood up so much.
Yes, all these random adults in the town.
That was season 13. Season 14, we get this 3-parter where the boys are dressing up as superheroes. Cartman's calling it Coon and Friends, and they're saying, well, why is it Coon and Friends? It's all of us. And then I realised they're making that point about Spider-Man and Friends. Cartman's like, well, I'm the one they've heard of. That's what Spider-Man would say too, isn't it? We find out gradually who each superhero is, because they're almost all of them disguised in some way. Obviously not Cartman. Stan, you can see his hair and you can hear his voice. And Token we can recognise because he is the only non-white member of the group. Others of them, though, they've got things on their faces that disguise their hair, that disguise their voice. And the first time it was quite fun to guess who was who, especially as with their voices disguised, it wasn't as easy as usual to tell who was Matt Stone and who was Trey Parker. we find out Mysterion is Kenny. He tries to talk to his friends about having an actual superpower. He can't die. They don't believe him. Now, with a thing going on as long as South Park, there are going to be continuity differences, if not errors. I say that because I think they're not really mistakes. I think Trey Parker is aware of them and doesn't really mind in order to make the episode work. In season 5, when, as I was saying, Kenny is there specifically to die, you get lines like, "That was a good one." He tells them other things as well. Sometimes I see heaven, sometimes I see hell. That happened in the movie, and it happened in the episode called Best Friends Forever, where Kenny is in a vegetative state and his spirit is wanted in heaven to fight a war against hell that he's been doing very successfully in a computer game. And he says, "But whatever happens, I always end up back in my bed in my same old clothes." And it's interesting to see some acknowledgement and to get some perspective from Kenny. From quite early on, you do see awareness in Kenny that he's likely to die. He's frightened throughout the first Christmas special in season 1 with Mr. Hanky of getting electrocuted and falling off things.
And of course that ends up being the first episode in which Kenny doesn't die for a Christmas treat, and he's very pleased about that.
Meanwhile, the show is satirising BP and their oil spillage in the Gulf of Mexico, the CEO apologising in various different settings, smelling flowers and what have you, saying, "I'm sorry." The funny one is when he's lying naked on his stomach on the bearskin rug, turning to the camera saying, "We're sorry." This leads up to BP drilling through to another dimension and releasing this Cthulhu demon. And Kenny finds out and believes it's his destiny to sacrifice himself and be killed once and for all by another immortal. This is information he gets from the Goth kids. And it seems to be some kind of big journey towards Kenny finding out all the answers to what's been going on with him. Turns out that's not what it is at all. It's this other character, Bradley, younger brother of Henrietta the Goth, who calls himself Mintberry Crunch in the superhero group, and nobody really gets what that's meant to be about, and he seems like he's a bit of a joke. Turns out all this is for him to find out about his alien parents, like Superman. And I thought, well, okay, I don't really want an explanation about why Kenny doesn't die. His parents saying at the end, "We should have never gone to that cult meeting," is more than enough. On the other hand, it is rather anticlimactic. I think it doesn't really warrant a 3-parter.
It's quite nice the way it links back to the season 4 episode where Kenny's mother is pregnant and they offer a joke explanation that this has happened 50 times and every time we have a brand new Kenny, and that's how he seems to keep coming back to life. In the Cthulhu bit, it seems his resurrection is dependent on his mother, whereas at other times he does appear to resurrect miraculously without his mother's help. As you say, it's not continuity errors, it's just continuity differences that they are aware of, and it never tries to fully explain anything like that too much. It all is rather surreal fun and wouldn't want to be pinned down too much, but it's nice to explore little possible explanations for a long-standing aspect of the show like that. If you join us again on the final Sunday in August, you'll hear us doing another podcast. And the subject of that one will be
George Romero's original Living Dead trilogy.
Good night out there.
Whatever you are.